Alright guys, so we're getting ready to make some clam chowder today, Seattle style. So here's my clams that I steamed in some hot water. And what I did with the hot water when I was done, I strained it to get my clam juice, which is in this pot. I have my potatoes all diced up and my chicken broth, onions, some extra clams chopped up and some more clams I'm getting ready to chop up along with my garlic, parsley for my garnish. I have my thyme and oregano and then 2 celery stalks chopped up, some more clam juice as well over on this side, and my half a cup of chicken broth that is in here, where I'm going to put some potatoes to blend up to make my broth creamy when I get ready to make this soup. So again, let's get ready to start.
Okay, so what I'm doing here in this pot is I put the bacon in. You want to cook it to where it's going to get nice and crispy. And once it gets nice and crispy, we're going to take it out. And then we're going to add our celery, our onion, our garlic in and saute that up into the pot. All right. So if I think my stove is cooking too fast, which a minute ago it was because I turned it on before we started, hence why I got the extra smoke going, I just adjust my heat. All right. So nice thing about cooking, you can always pay attention to what you're doing, adjust your heat if needed. Everyone's stove is different, so, pay attention to the settings on your stove. Sometimes you might have to adjust up or down to control the heat. So again, I'm just letting them sit in the pot. I'm not really concerned about whether they're sticking because, again, once they start cooking, I'm going to move them around just to get the other side to cook. Now you can, do a shortcut and, some people like to maybe fry them up in a pan. The reason why I like to do them in the pot that I'm going to cook everything in is I want some of the grease or the fat from the bacon to stay in the pan to help saute up those onions and celery. Okay, and any bacon you can use. Now, if you're leaning towards like a turkey bacon, you might not get as much of that oil that you want to use to saute up your onion and celery. So you might end up having to adjust by adding a little bit of oil to the pot. All right. So keep that in mind. And of course, if your bacon isn't as fatty, you might not have as much oil in there. You can always adjust by just adding a tip of oil in the pan so you can saute up those celery and onions. All right. We're going to do this completely from scratch today. We're not taking a shortcut where I have the finished version for you because it doesn't really take a really long time to make this. And when you make this, trust me, you're not going to want to go back to eating clam chowder from a can. You're going to end up wanting to try them at whether you make them yourself from scratch or you go to like a seafood place that makes them from scratch. All right. And like I said, 2 of my favorite places that I had clam chowder that I enjoyed was from Connecticut and from Seattle. So, having them made from a local restaurant in those parts of the country, it's just absolutely amazing. Back this way. Move it around a little bit more. See a couple of pieces, which is the fattier part that can use a little bit more cooking. And again, once you get them into your bowl, they're going to continue to cook and get a little bit more crispy. All right. So this looks good. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to adjust my heat a little bit. I want to leave the oil in the pan. Drain the oil. This is what I'm doing here. Add this to my pan. Take the rest out. Okay, so you can see this took a couple of minutes. Didn't take super long to do. So I'm gonna add my onion, celery, and we're gonna cook this for a couple of minutes, about 2 minutes, not too long. You just want to see that it gets translucent in the cooking process, and just make sure all your pieces is nice and small. The flavor that's left in the pan, the oil, the bits and pieces of the bacon, that's gonna all fuse with this onion and celery. I'm gonna add my garlic as well. And same thing, you want your garlic to be in small pieces. So I'm using my garlic press to just mince it out. Moving it around. Okay, so my 1.5 cup of chicken broth is what I need. My thyme and my oregano and my bay leaf. 1 bay leaf is all you need. And then my potatoes. So I used about 2 medium potatoes. I cut them up into small pieces. Now, because I'm using my potatoes for the chowder, I'm also gonna use some of it to thicken up the broth. Now, if I wasn't using potatoes as my thickener, I could also use flour. If I decided to use flour, what I would do is add some flour here to mix it in with the onions, but I'm not doing that. I'm actually, you know, some people have some sensitivity to flour, so we're gonna use potato. Another thing you could also use is potato starch as well. So for me, I'm just gonna use some of this. If I see that it doesn't thicken up as much as I want, I can use a little bit of potato starch. This looks good. I'm gonna have add the broth. Okay, add my potatoes. I want to bring this to a boil. I'm gonna add the thyme and the bay leaf and the oregano, so that goes in there. And we're gonna let this cook for about 10-15 minutes. I'm gonna cover it up, give it some time to just kind of cook itself down until the potatoes get a little bit soft. So while this is cooking, we're gonna work on our clams. So when you get the fresh clams, you rinse them off in cold water, rub them clean so you get all the sand off of them. You're gonna put them into a big pot, you know, like whether it's this size, about 2 pounds of clams, right? Put them in a pot with 1 cup of water and turn the stove on to like a medium-high heat. You're gonna let it, you know, cook for about 5 to 7 minutes. After 5 to 7 minutes, what's happening to the clams is the water, the steam is helping to open up the clams. Once the clams are open, you want to take them out of the pot, put them in a bowl, all the open ones. All the ones that didn't open, you want to discard them, throw them away, because they didn't open. Don't try to force to open them. It just means that they're not good for you to eat. Okay, take the open clams just like I showed you, and we're going to chop them up. Now the liquid that's left into the pot, you're going to get a sieve or with a strainer, you know, and you're going to drain the water from that pot into a bowl, and that's where you get that nice clear broth, and all this, any broken shells or any excessive maybe sand that was left on the clam that you didn't get off is not going to come in here. Okay, it's going to stay in that sieve, and then all you're left with is this beautiful clear, you know, like creamy color broth, and that's what you're going to use as your clam juice. Clams are ready, all chopped up. Our clam juice is here. Our heavy whipping cream is what we're gonna need. And we're gonna need 2 tablespoons of butter, so that's right here. The bacon from earlier that we reserved. Salt and black pepper. That's your topping right there. Just salt, some black pepper. Keep in mind your chicken broth is salty, so you don't want to add a lot of salt into the pot. I usually like to let everything cook down a little bit first before I add any salt to it. Once I take the potatoes out that I need and blend those, and I start adding in the remaining of my ingredients,
you know, especially my bacon, that's when I'm gonna taste my pot to see the flavor, how the flavor is. And at that point, I'm gonna adjust my salt and add if salt is needed. And I've made this before, so for me, you know, it's usually like a small dash or two of salt that I add to this pot. All right, and because my potatoes are nice and small, they usually cook pretty quick. So here's what the pot looks like. The seasonings are in here. I usually like to test. If I can, you know, gently press down on a potato and it goes through pretty quick, then I know my, you know, for most part, my potatoes are done. And like I said, I'm gonna use some of the potatoes. Of course, if you like a lot of potatoes, you know, put some extra potatoes in there. Again, you like it super thick, thicken it up. This is a recipe that you could play with. So I'm just adding just some potatoes to this because I just want to thicken up my pot. So I have enough potatoes that I'm gonna have in here. All right, so I'm gonna blend this up before I add all my ingredients. Okay, my blended potatoes. And so you're just gonna cook this to your consistency. So at this point, I'm gonna add my clam juice to the pot, my clams, my bacon. I want to bring this back up to where it's starting to simmer again. Add my potatoes. So you can see how thick this is. This is what thickens up my soup. My butter goes in. Give it a stir. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes just to come back up to heat for a minute before I add in this. I'm gonna add some black pepper while we're here, while we wait for it to start back up by getting hot. Okay, I'm gonna let this kind of come back up to a little simmer and heat itself all the way through. Once I start seeing some bubbles form, I'm gonna just reduce the stove to like a medium low setting, but not completely low. What I want to just do is start getting that bacon flavor to cook into this. And then I can also, you know, and get the butter melted. I can taste if I want at this point to see how the flavor tastes with the bacon, and then add my heavy cream. Okay. And it's always good to give it, you know, let it cook for a little bit longer just to kind of get everything infused together. Let me get my cover. And while that does its thing, again, use the time to clean your kitchen. So again, I'm gonna come back and here's my pot. This looks amazing. And again, you can always test your potatoes. And at this point, they should be fully cooked through. I like to use red potatoes because they seem to hold a lot better during the cooking process. They don't break apart as much as, say, your white potatoes. So, you know, you'll still see them through this process. Okay. So this has really cooked itself to, I can see, nice consistency. Like I said, if you want it thicker, you can adjust by doing like a potato starch in here, thickener to help if you have any gluten issues. So I'm gonna add my heavy whipping cream. And then I'm gonna cook this down for about 10 minutes. How many of you like your soup thick or thin? How many people like a really thick clam chowder? I'm just gonna taste for flavor right now, and then I'm gonna adjust the flavor here, and then let it take that last 10 minutes or so to cook. All right, so I'm gonna just add a sprinkler or so of salt, which is probably less, like I said, less than 1/8 of a teaspoon. I can go back and add a little bit more black pepper. And like I said, if you like thicker, you know, what I like to do, if I find that it doesn't thicken up as much as I want, I usually like just take a little bit of the broth from the pot. I'm gonna cover this and let it just kind of bring itself back up to a boil before I let it, before I reduce it and simmer it. So this is a potato starch, similar to cornstarch, but you know, it's made from potatoes instead. I can add it to this broth, use a whisk or a fork just to kind of thicken up into a paste. And that's if you want to make it thicker. All right, if you have no issues with flour, you can, like I said, right at the part where we put the celery and onions in and they're almost done cooking, you could put a little bit flour in there, like a tablespoon or two, to make your roux to make it nice and you know, the broth to get nice and thick. So again, I'm gonna add this in since I still have like a 10-minute cooking process left. And just want to use the whole thing. And you can see this soup does not take long to make. Okay, I'm just making sure I give the starch that time to just move around and blend in with this heavy whipping cream. Again, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna taste one more time for flavor and see if I need to adjust. Okay. So delicious. And here's the thing, when you use fresh clams, the flavor in it really comes out a lot more than when you use, you know, the canned clams. It worked for some people. Some people might not like that seafood, you know, that sea type flavor as much. So, you know, using the bottled or the clams from the can will kind of bring it down a notch, but I love seafood, so for me this is perfect. You can add like a thicker type of fish, like maybe a cod. If you use like a flounder or anything, those fishes are too thin, so a thick type of fish, mahi-mahi or cod would be great, and you can add pieces of that into the pot and add that to enhance and extend your clam chowder, which is actually, if you go to Seattle, they do this amazing seafood chowder. So you can do the same thing, add clams, add your seafood, whatever your favorite seafood is, toss it in there, and that will really, really make this stew, this clam chowder, amazing to another level. Okay. So like I said, once you get all, you know, the first part is the bacon, because that's what makes it slightly different from, say, like a New England style clam chowder, is that bacon that they put in here. So the bacon, the grease that cooks up the celery and the onions, and you want them to be chopped fine, because you don't want to eat your clam chowder where you're biting into big chunks of onions or celery. And that's why they're so fine, and they actually cook down quite a bit through the cooking process of you cooking your potatoes with that flavor, the chicken broth. You know, you don't have to use chicken broth. You could use like maybe vegetable broth if you want, but chicken or vegetable is like my two go-to, you know, if you want to do that. And that's to just give it flavor, you know, give it more flavor as you're cooking this down. Okay, so here is what this looks like. I mean, it doesn't take that long. Okay, I'm just stirring, making sure nothing is sticking to the bottom of my pan. And that's why you want to keep it to a slow simmer,
Sometimes my stove has a mind of its own. So look how beautiful this looks. And this is your clam chowder. This is pretty much ready to eat. Okay. Like I said, you can, like this with bread, you could either toast your sourdough, break them up in, in your bowl when you're about to eat it. Or if you want, take your sourdough, put it in the bottom of your bowl and pour your soup on top, or just take your sourdough and dip it right in. So it's all about, what makes sense to you and how you want to enjoy this soup. But this soup looks nice and creamy and, gorgeous. And I'm gonna try it again and see what my flavor looks like before I finish turning off the stove. Of course, this is hot. So, really, really delicious. Wow. Amazing. This is so delicious. So again, when I'm ready to serve this, I would just go ahead and sprinkle some parsley on top. So let me kind of show you what this finishing touch looks like. All right, guys, so here goes our clam chowder that is complete. It is completely done, and now we're ready to serve it. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the video on how to make this Seattle style clam chowder, which I have in this bowl, and it came out absolutely delicious. So we're gonna try it. Here we go. So full of flavor, so delicious. I hope you try it at home. Talk to you soon. Bye.